Thanks for joining me. This lab session is entitled INFLUXDB and GRAFANA Lab. So far, you've been able to see what JMeter does for you by performance analysis in the GUI mode and in the non-GUI mode. We have talked about JMeter interfacing with well-known application performance monitors, and in the last lecture, I talked about implementing another results analysis solution called INFLUXDB and GRAFANA with JMeter. In this session, I want to give you an idea of what you can expect if you choose to use this solution during testing with JMeter. If you did not implement the software with the instructions I provided with the last lecture, that's okay. If you did, you will benefit more from this lab. Of course, if you did not implement the INFLUXDB and GRAFANA software, I hope this lab will create an interest. Join me in the lab. One of my favorite places to put software that I use with JMeter is to put it in the JMeter folder. And so here we are at my JMeter folder, and inside you can see a folder named INFLUXDB and then another one named GRAFANA. So this is where I have implemented it. It's not a must to implement it there, but this is where I put it so I can keep up with it. Now, of course, each one comes with its own release, and from time to time you want to look out on the internet if you're going to continue to use it and upgrade when there is an upgrade. All right, so talking about the INFLUXDB for just a second, this is the database manager software. So inside this folder, there are basically two programs that are of use or value to me, and they should be, excuse me, to you. The INFLUXD is one that has to be started in order for the database to be started. The other one, INFLUX without the D, that is a tool to use as a client against the database so that you can go and take a look at it, make sure it's okay, or even create new databases when you desire to do so. Okay, so we'll come back and talk a little bit more. I'm actually going to use the influx.exe program momentarily. But I want you to see also that, as I said, there is the GRAFANA, and I'll open that one. There's its release. And in the bin folder, there's a piece of software named grafana-server.exe. That has to be started in order for you to interact with the monitor. So this tool acts as the monitor software for your connection with JMeter. Okay, now we'll close this. Well, actually, I won't close that just yet. Sorry about that. Let me go back to looking for INFLUXDB. Open that again, and I want to go ahead and start this guy. So just double click on it. You'll get a pop-up window like this. It's unknown, but it's okay. Click run, and now you see a command prompt that has been opened, and we can enter commands, and I will do so shortly. Let me just go ahead and make it bigger. Hopefully that looks a little better on the screen. And now I want to switch over to, this is the opening of the database. So the INFLUXD program was started, and you get some messages indicating such. nothing to do more once that is done. I will minimize that one. Then the next one I want to show is, if I get the right one, this is the Grafana -server. And so now the Grafana server is active as well. I started it, and we'll be able to interact with Grafana through the browser. Close that. And now let's take a look at, well, actually, let's go here before we go. I want to show you what happens in JMeter and what has to be there as a minimum. But before we do that, I can type in a command, use a particular database, JMeter results. Hit the enter key, and it says now I'm using or connected to the database. Now I can do a select asterisk from JMeter. I know that may sound a little confusing, but that's the simple approach to it. And voila. What we see, I had an old test that I called stores, and that data is still there on the database. And now I have flight pay information on the database. So in JMeter, I actually created an interface there, and I'll show you that shortly, that allowed this data to be collected on a load test run that I did earlier. And you can see the transaction name, or from the transaction statements that are in JMeter. Okay, now I'll close that one, I'll minimize that, and we want to look at minimize that JMeter, and I have the load test up and running, and you'll notice I've highlighted load flight pay, and if I expand that, I can scroll down here, and there's a new element that I added called the INFLUXDB backend listener. And this is the configuration information. What's most important, the default is the JMeter results as the database, but the application name, you give it what you want so that you can refer to it in Grafana, and the data will be collected associated with that name. And then the measurements, we label it JMeter. One more thing, we have a test title, and you'll see where that comes into Grafana, kind of as an overall name associated with the data that was collected. And so I just put a 1 at the end of it. And this is just a simple approach. If you want to be able to collect all of the data for all of the processes, all the functions, then you can do that. I'm just doing one to show you, to give you an example. And so that is the connection there. There's one more thing that you can do. I'm not sure it's really a must, but I added this particular value to the HTTP header manager, and there's a place that it looks for this in the collection process. And so I gave it a name and a value, statistics, and it doesn't look like it's that important. because I think really the important piece is here. Being able to specify the database to locate the information or to store the information and provide these 2-3 values for this listener. And this listener will be responsible for collecting the data for this thread group. Now, so much for JMeter. I went on, I ran the test as I normally do, save a little time, and then you're able to you can do this in real time, or you can do it after the fact, after the test is completed. And what you want is to specify localhost 3000. That will get you to this welcome page for Grafana. Now, Grafana has 2 pieces of setup for you. One is for the data source, the other is for the dashboard. The dashboard is where you see the test results and in a graphical fashion, and the data source is what you set up for it to pull it into its arena so that it can present this information fairly easily. Now, down here is the item we're going to look at, and it's called Apache JMeter Dashboard using Core INFLUXDB Backend Listener Client. So this is the connection on the Grafana side to what we saw on the JMeter side. If I click on this Create Data Source button, you will see that there's an option for INFLUXDB, and that's how that part got set up. We'll go back one more time. If I click on this button, it's how we start to create a dashboard. I used a template, pulled it in, and for the dashboard. So we won't try to do that. We're not going to go through that process. It's a little time consuming, takes a little time, but here is the dashboard. Go back here, and I can get to it from here, or I can get to it if I go back to the home page down here. Either way, I come to something that looks like this. So this is considered a dashboard in Grafana. Sorry, lost my train of thought. Now, one thing that's missing is the application name. So what I specified was Flight Pay. And there we are. Now, one more thing that I already had done, but that needed to be done, was to go here and specify the right time range. So it started around 6 o'clock, 6:05, and ended about 6:08, so on that date. And so that's what I had to do, and then apply that range. And you can see you have many easy to use selections that can get you to different time zones or time periods that you might have testing that was done. And if it's all on the database, then you can zoom in on it this way. And a lot of application performance monitors have this same kind of feature. Okay, so back to this, we're looking at the total requests that went through, 114, and no failures. The kilobytes for received bytes, and this is on a per second basis, and 30 bytes on sent on a per second basis, and there were no errors, so we don't see this moving up, no percentage there. We have throughput information. We have no errors. We have active threads from between this time and 808 or 608, I'm sorry. And if I scroll down a little bit more, we have a couple more reports. We have the response time data, the 95th percentile. We can change that. Excuse me. And we have the network traffic. We can see that there were two pieces of data, one going, one coming. You can see the max and the average. All right, and nothing else to show down there. Now, we can do something else with this tool that's nice. I like that there's an explore process that we can use, and I'll click on that, and then you get a little help here with a select builder, let's call it. And one of the things what we can do is we can select the measurement. So we want the measurements from JMeter, and we need to add a where clause, and we want the application, and we need to specify a value of flight pay. Once we've done that, then we can select the fields that are associated with JMeter. Click on that value, and we see all of the data that was collected all the way down to here. So we want to start with the average response time. Let's click on that. And we don't need this. It's telling us now that, well, you're going to need a group by. All right, fine. We also want to use distinct for the field. So we click that. Then this information is for the timestamps. We shouldn't have to mess with that. That group by is good. So what's left? I believe what we need to do, there's a couple things we can do. One, we can look at the select statement. So this is what was created. I can go through that real quick once you're used to looking at selects. If you're familiar with it, this looks like a good one. It's going against that database or measurement database, and the application we're looking for is flight pay, and then we're going to do a group by. And this, as I said, this statement is sufficient. I know it's good. I'm not worried about it. So one more thing I can do, I can come up here and I can specify when do I want, what's the time period that I want. So 05 through 08. I click that, and voila, now I have a select that was built for in this explore area to go against the database and pull information for average response time. So these are the average response times that went from less than a second to over 7 seconds. So that's, and we can see it graphically, and we can point to the different data points on that graph line, and we can see that the top one was 7 seconds or 7.5 seconds or a little bit more than that. And the time period from 6:30 6 o'clock at 6 minutes into 6 o'clock through almost 8 minutes, well, 7:20. An interesting thing is that if we go back to right here, we can click on that again and see and change. Let's say we want to see 90 percentile. Click on that, and just that easily, we now have the data for the percentile, the 90th percentile. So it went from a high, even early on in the testing, we had 1 second response time, and it went on all the way up to 12 seconds of response time. So the average didn't really tell the story. The 90 percentile and 95 percentile, those tell the story. And what we see is the response time increased dramatically during that load test run. Now, also we can go back and we can look at maximum and see how that looked. Was it really high? And I think it was. If we had errors, we could look for that. This one is an interesting one, and I tried to find some documentation on it, and I wasn't successful. But if you notice, it started at roughly that same time, 1806, but it goes all the way to 1808, more than that 720. So it leads me to believe that this represents what was really the 100 concurrent users that was started, and the flight pay transactions stopped right about this time. So that's an interesting story to tell as well. I won't belabor on that. All right, so as you can see, you can use the Explore functionality within Grafana to be able to look at the details that are all the data that was collected and see how it looks, and you can actually create some graphs to actually add to whatever you're reporting on to give more data and more understanding as to what happened. And one of the things we can truly say, by seeing those high response times, we can correlate that to what was happening on the machine, my machine. We saw where the CPU utilization went up to 100%, and we found that there were huge spikes for I/O. And so that all works together to be able to communicate that, okay, we're running this application on the wrong machine. We need a more robust machine to continue. Okay, I'll leave it at that. And that's my little presentation on those tools, Grafana and INFLUXDB, along with JMeter. Thanks for your time. My time has ended for this session. I thank you for yours. Join me in the next video.